While Western politicians like to pretend Israel is a liberal country fighting a targeted war against terrorists, its leaders are saying otherwise. And just in the last 3 days, we have more terrifying examples. First, Yair Lapid is part of the supposedly centrist opposition to Benjamin Netanyahu. This is what he told Sky on Sunday about the Gazan death toll.
You have to remember, Jonathan, many of the people who were killed were terrorists. The majority of people who were killed were Hamas terrorists. People are saying this number, 12,000 people were killed. Yes, the Hamas is an army of 40,000 people, and many of them were killed, and good riddance.
So we know 12,000 people, at least, have been killed in Gaza. 5,500 of them are children, right? So there is no way a majority of the 12,000 people are Hamas fighters, right? Unless you consider basically every adult in Gaza a member of Hamas, which does seem to be what many people in Israel do consider them to be, right? All of Gaza, we've heard this so many times before, everyone in Gaza is a fair target, essentially. And remember, Lapid is supposed to be the centrist opposition to Netanyahu. So often, oh yes, you can criticize the government of Netanyahu, but you can't criticize Israeli society in general. Well, Netanyahu, his opposition is someone who thinks that everyone in Gaza is a safe target, it seems, right? That there isn't this sort of lovely, liberal Israeli politician who's just waiting to take over the country. Doesn't exist. The Labour Party, sort of the traditional liberal Zionists, they have 4 MPs out of 120. So it is a deeply conservative and reactionary country at the moment. That shows the general attitude to Palestinian life across the Israeli political establishment. And among the military establishment, it's just as scary. Giora Eiland is the former head of the Israeli National Security Council, and he penned an article in a major Israeli newspaper over the weekend where he said this. Now, this is really terrifying. The way to win the war faster and at a lower cost for us requires a system collapse on the other side and not the mere killing of more Hamas fighters. The international community warns us of a humanitarian disaster in Gaza and of severe epidemics. We must not shy away from this, as difficult as that may be. After all, severe epidemics in the south of the Gaza Strip will bring victory closer and reduce casualties among army soldiers. This is a former very high-level military official saying publicly, writing in an Israeli newspaper, that Israel should allow and encourage epidemics to spread in Gaza because that will help them win the war. Now, what's especially terrifying here is this has very recently been quote tweeted by Israel's finance minister, who says he agrees with every word in the article. Every word in the article. So that is someone in Netanyahu's cabinet, the finance minister, a very, very high up role. And this is especially sinister, especially terrifying, because this is already happening. Now, this was published by Politico on Sunday. The International Rescue Committee on Thursday warned of the inevitable spread of waterborne illnesses such as cholera and typhoid caused by contaminated water sources and a lack of sanitation. Currently, 95% of the population in Gaza has no access to safe water, while 64% of primary health facilities have shut down, IRC warns, as Israel conducts a lethal bombing campaign. The conditions are ripe for the spread of communicable and waterborne diseases that adversely affect children and lead to preventable deaths, said Bob Kitchen, the IRC's Vice President of Emergencies. The World Health Organization on Wednesday warned that lack of fuel has disrupted waste collection and caused desalination plants to shut down, leading to a significant increase in the spread of bacterial infections, such as diarrhea, which has already hit 33,000 people since mid-October. You've got senior politicians, the finance minister saying he agrees with every word in an article by a former major general in the military, who, as I say, sort of led the security establishment, who's saying we want to allow or encourage epidemics to spread. And you've still got Western politicians saying this isn't collective punishment. No, this is a targeted strike against Hamas. Cholera is spreading, right? Because they've cut off the water supply. They've cut off the fuel so the desalination plants don't work. And what happens in that situation? Disease spreads. Now, you've still got people in the West, still got people in Britain saying this is just the inevitable consequence of war. It's all Hamas's fault. They are backing collective punishment, which is already killing 5,000 kids and is going to kill a lot more. And that seems to be part of the plan. Now, it is incredibly grim, especially as the spread of disease will disproportionately affect children in Gaza. Meanwhile, some children in Israel have come up with a new song. within a year, we will annihilate everyone, right? Sung by kids. It was published on the website and social media accounts of the state broadcaster, Israel's public broadcaster called Kan News. Now, they later deleted it without explanation. Of course, there is some dissent to this intensely violent message coming from Israeli society, but it is heavily policed. At a small protest in favor of a ceasefire in Tel Aviv on Saturday, police didn't allow signs saying, "One massacre does not justify another," "No to apartheid," "No to the occupation and siege," "Stop the war," and "Bibi go home." Those were all taken out by the police and weren't allowed to be held at a protest. David, this is all very much reminding me of segments we did on this show when it came to sort of Russian politics and society when they invaded Ukraine. You had the Z movement, sort of popular outpouring of support for a brutal invasion of a neighboring country, right? Genocidal language coming from politicians. And when that was the case, we did those segments, but so did the BBC, so did all of the major liberal outlets. They all said, this is shocking. Russia is a sick society. We need to sanction it. It's beyond salvageable, right? The whole society is sick, is what we heard. And we're seeing pretty much the same scenes in Israel, but we're still pretending that Israel is this normal liberal country that's just doing an aggressive counterterrorism operation.
I think this gets to the core of why by we, I mean the community around Novara and around the world, are against a war. We call ourselves anti-war. We call ourselves anti-war not just because of the consequences of war, which is, of course, a motivation that is sufficient to call for a ceasefire, to pursue a negotiated, peaceful settlement to some of these conflicts, but because war itself is a cause. War is an engine of genocidal sentiment, especially in the context of a government that the international community has been decrying for months as highly reactionary, neo-fascist, very homophobic, if we want to go into the realm of social policies. And if you have that as the vanguard of a government, then war becomes an engine through which those fascist and genocidal ideas are then transmitted to a society. You showed the clip of the children singing, and I think is a great example of what I'm trying to illustrate and what I think is the core spiritual logic of the anti-war movement, as I understand it, and as I feel we should all understand it together, which is that war creates genocidal sentiment. War itself is an engine of hatred and division. I think that we are all too often convinced that the consequences of war will create a movement for peace, that the consequences of war will motivate us to feel sympathy or empathy. We feel that the images of dead children and dead families and bombed out buildings will be sufficient to convince the perpetrators that they are committing not just crimes, but real humanitarian crises in the context of this particular war. But they're equally likely to harden the hearts of the people who are perpetrating those crimes, to radicalize, to militarize, to push them towards even more bloodthirsty genocidal sentiment. And that is the reason, the double reason for a ceasefire. It's not only so we can stop the violence and protect Palestinians in their fundamental rights enshrined in national and international law. It's also to try to stop, to try to notch that transmission, to clog that node that's moving from the highest levels of the Israeli government deeper and deeper into Israeli society and outward to its Israeli backers, who seek not only to justify but to motivate some of these really terrifying, truly genocidal sentiments that are becoming commonplace. That is why we stand so firm on an anti-war platform, not because this or that conflict are just or unjust, although I would be happy to debate those merits, as I'm sure you have many times on this program, but it's because war creates its own monsters that endure long past the narrow confines of a particular conflict to indoctrinate new generations with the trauma, and of course, with the hatred for the bogeyman opponent that is now hanging over their life, their society, their community for the rest of their lives. These will be defining moments that create and embitter entire generations of people against Palestinian life and livelihood, and that is what's most terrifying, I think, in this moment.